Okay, so like I said, this first one we're going to look at is the National Map Viewer. You should come up with something like this, whether you click on the link or you just search for it. Like I said, you're going to find the majority of your information from this website when it comes to large scale data sets. So you can see over here, just on the left, there's a lot of different information. We're only going to touch on a couple, but again, it's good to know this as a resource because you can see just the variety of information. So if you just look at this, you can see you have US topo. So that's actually, and if I click on that, then it gives you a couple other subcategories. And what's great about is that you can see this one, I think this isn't the actual one, but you can even click on the description to look at the metadata for it. So I think this is actually just a rastered format, which isn't really that helpful. But if I scroll down to my other elevation products, you can see there's actually contours selected here. So within this first elevation products, 3DEP, you get your DEM files. So all those kind of grayscale imagery. Again, I'll click on this and you can just see that it's essentially just giving you the different resolutions of those DEM files. Some are more detailed. Obviously, the 1/3 arc second is going to be much more detailed than the 1/9, or even the 1 arc second will be even more detailed. So that's really just a resolution of what that's talking about. But you can also see that you have contours. And what's cool about this is you can actually see that it comes in a shape file. So that means your contours are actually line work. They aren't just an image of your contours. Just as a quick example, if I zoom into this, then I say show all availability. So it's saying that it's available there. So once you've selected what you want to find, you would then go to the top area here and say find products. And you can see it comes up with 4 results up here on the top of the page. And then it has these little thumbnails as an example. It's kind of hard to obviously tell where this information is actually at. So you can click on the footprint to see where it's referencing. So it's this entire giant rectangle for that one. This one's there, that one's there, and that one's there. So it gives you kind of an idea of where it's showing. You can also click the thumbnail to get an idea. So this is an entire shape file. It's, as you can see, it's actually not that bad. It's only 60 megabytes of for these contour lines. So you can see it's much better than this base, even this base one. Or I mean, if you zoom in, you can start to see what that is essentially showing you. And so once you have that, then you can obviously download it. So it's really accessible to get this information. Don't add it to the cart. You can just click the download button and then it comes with the download prompt. So that's a cool thing just to know, like, oh, now I can get super high resolution contour lines for my site. Let's go back over to your data set. So that's just an example. You can look at all the different stuff that's within this. We'll cover some at different scales. But like I said, we're really working or worried about the western part of the United States. So where you're going to get a lot of that is in your small scale data sets. The reason it's called small scale is just because it's relatively low resolution information. It's not really that low resolution, but it's intended to look at stuff at the continental scale. Like you can find a lot of this information at the state or even the city level, but for looking at stuff at this grand of a scale, you can find a lot of the information here. So you'll see that it just defaults to having boundaries selected. This is a couple different things. We're it's required that we find our state and country boundaries. So I'm going to have that selected. I'm going to, so you have the selection of what type of category you want to, then the data extent. So we don't want just the national extent, we want North America as the extent for that. And then again, we have the option to choose the format. In this case, I want the shape file. So I'll select that. So I've got my boundaries. I still don't know what type of boundaries yet, but then I know it's going to be limited to North America and the shape file. So I'm going to click Find Products. And you'll see it's only got 2 results. That's nice. I don't have to comb through too much information. You have the title here, so USGS Small Scale Dataset, North American Atlas, Political Boundaries. That seems pretty accurate to what I'm looking for. The other one's Populated Places. I'm not sure what that one is. It might just be the names, but you can see that this one is right there. Again, I could look at the footprint just to see where exactly it's covering, and you can see that it's literally covering all parts of from Alaska and Canada all the way down to the edge of Central America. So I'm going to go ahead and just download that. Something to be aware of is the download format that it comes in. It comes in this .tar, .gz file format. You're going to have to find something to unzip that. I know you all are pretty resourceful, so I'm sure you know that. One that I've been using that's pretty effective is Zip Opener, which is just an app for Windows 10. You might find another unique one on the Mac side. I wasn't able to investigate that, but this is a good application to use to unzip these types of file formats. You have to run it twice on the file because it unzips the one compressed file format, then it has to unzip the next one. So it's a little tedious, but it does work. So I've downloaded that file. I'm gonna go ahead and unzip it. So I've already got a file that I've been saving these to, so I'm gonna do base file. And you can see it does it pretty quickly, says success. I'm gonna click on that again. I'm gonna click back now. Then I'm gonna do open zip. I'm gonna try and find that file I just downloaded. So it's gonna look from this icon oops, was that the right one? I don't think so. So I have this one, so it's now boundary.shape.tar. I then take that TAR file and unpack that. I'm gonna just save this to another folder. Just unpack it there. This one takes a little bit longer, like a whole 2 seconds longer sometimes. So that's worked. So you'll see that now I've got my weird name, and then there's a couple different options. So once you've unzipped that and gone through that process, now you're going to want to go to QGIS. I think this is set up to a terrible projection, so let me actually just reboot it just to ensure that, because it's really important to kind of see what happens. Reboot QGIS. Everybody following along to some degree?
Should we be actually following along now? Because that's
Maybe. Again, I'll upload these videos, but you're also expected to start working on it almost immediately. So, okay, so I have QGIS open. The two ways of bringing in files are over on the side here. So the first one is asking for that vector layer, or in this case, a shape file. So every time you download a shape file, you use this icon up here. If you want to bring in some type of rastered image or GeoTIFF, it's just the next icon down. So you can even see the icons themselves. That looks like a vector. This one looks like a raster. Not that difficult to remember that logic. So what type of file did we just download? Shape file. So I'm going to click on this add vector layer. It then brings up this window to ask you where's that shape file. I'm not going to have to change anything. I'm just going to click browse. And then I've got the file I just downloaded. So I've got two different options. Sometimes you'll see that there's multiple file extension names used. Ooh, I don't know what happened. Let me try that again. I moved it and it ruined it. Huh. I don't know what happened to this, but oh, there it is. So you'll see that there's a couple options in the type. This one's pretty easy. I mean, it says SHP file. That's generally referring to a shape file. Sometimes you'll have multiple shape files in there that aren't exactly the same thing. A good rule of thumb is to just look for the largest file type. That's usually the one you need. That's the actual physical contents. All these other files that have the same name but different extensions are just part of the metadata or other information needed to reference those shape files. So this first one is boundary L, and then there's also one that's a boundary P. One essentially is just the lines, the other one gives it a fill. I don't know why you would need that you need both, because you can obviously change those settings in QGIS, as I'll show you. So I'm just going to click on this one. I just happen to know that that L means the lines because I did it earlier. So I'll hit open, then I'll hit open again. Ooh, it doesn't look, I think I grabbed the wrong one. So it comes with an Illustrator file. It's not really that valuable since it doesn't have any information with it. So I'm going to make sure to do the shape file again. So there you go. Now you got this wonky looking US, and I know that's faint, so I'm just going to change that real quick. There you go. So you see that? So you, like it showed, it does do the entire continental US. However, does it look correct? It looks kind of distorted, right? Like it almost seems stretched out, and then obviously as you get closer to Alaska, it gets really distorted. This is something that's really, 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 really important to know for these geomapping softwares, is that maps have all sorts of different projection types, right? Have you guys covered that yet in ArcGIS? So it's important to make sure you use the correct one. I'm not sure which one to use. If I click in the very bottom right, I can pull up this to change my projection system. I can say enable on the fly to kind of manually choose one, but I still, like, you can see how many different projection types there are if I scroll down this list. That's ridiculous how many there are. Obviously, each one relates to the location. So I need to know what exactly I want to choose. One good way to do that is to actually have another type of reference point on this. What I like to use personally as my reference point is a nice aerial image, right? Like that's probably a good starting point. And like I said, QGIS has a great plugin to allow you to look at the different aerial imagery. So I've already got it installed. It's called Open Layers plugin. To install plugins on QGIS, you go to the Plugins tab and just choose Manage and Install Plugins. It takes a second to open, but then you just type in Open Layers as one word, and you'll see this one, Open Layers plugin. So make sure to install that. All you have to do is click here. It'll say Install Plugin. Let's just go ahead and reinstall it. I hope that doesn't ruin everything. But all right, close. So once you've installed it, then you go over to the Web tab, and then you'll see Open Layers plugin. And like I said, there's all sorts of different ways to look at, excuse me, at your base image. You can look at the OpenStreetMap. You can look at Google Maps, and then you can look at the physical, streets, hybrid, satellite. You can do the same thing with Bing, so road, aerial width labels. So let's just select one of these. I'm gonna stick with our good friend Google Maps. And I'm gonna choose the satellite just to show you how high of a resolution this is. So you can already see, like, that already looks pretty clean, right? Let's see what happens when I start zooming in. It's gonna take a second to refresh each time, but I'm gonna just start slowly just moving in. It's still like, that's a great resolution on the screen. And we can even export it at a very high resolution as well. But let's just keep zooming in. So I'm getting closer and closer. Each time it refreshes, it rebuilds that resolution. We're still not even there yet. Oh, it's starting to take a little bit longer. But that's pretty high resolution. It's much better than Google Earth, I think. And like I said, like, it doesn't matter. I think is that the limit? Maybe a little bit more. Can it do it? I mean, yeah, that's a pretty awesome resolution. So what's great is you can zoom in quite a bit and have that refresh to fit the resolution for that screen size. So there's really no excuse to ever have a bad aerial image ever again. What's great with this, you won't even get the stupid Google Earth watermark on it or any of that information. I'll show you once we print it, or export it, so to speak, how much it keeps that information. I mean, if you start to zoom into like these mountain ranges, it's pretty crazy how much detail you get in that. That's pretty awesome. That's the resolution you'll get when you print it too. This projector doesn't even do it justice, so. I mean, I might have just found a lost person over on this trail, I don't know. I mean, look at that. It's pretty insane. I mean, it gets a little distorted because of the landforms, but it's pretty awesome. Okay, let's stay on track here. I'm just amazed. It's so awesome. Okay, so we got our aerial image, so we've checked that off the box, so to speak. Okay, what else do we need? Let's look for the shaded relief imagery. So we're gonna stay within that same category. I'm just gonna go click on this button to return to search. This is all still within the TNM download, except now instead of boundaries, I'm gonna deselect that. I'm gonna select the land cover selection. So if you aren't able to follow along, at least, or no, sorry, it's not the land cover, it's the elevation. So make a note of that. where to find your shade relief. It's in the small scale datasets elevation. For this one, I'm only going to look for North America because I think the other ones are bad. And then again, I'm going to use the GeoTIFF format. So we're looking for an aerial image in this case. The last one we found the vector. Now we're looking for a GeoTIFF. I'm going to click Find Products. And here we go. There's a couple different versions of the shade relief. You can get one that's colored with North America. There's really no need to do that one because we're going to find the actual elevation color range. So I'm going to go down to this one where it says USGS small scale dataset, grayscale, North America shaded relief. You'll see there's actually a couple I think I just selected the right settings, but find the one where it doesn't give a projection. So you can see this one's bathymetric shaded. There's another one that has a projection set to it. That's not going to match up with your other file information. So make sure not to download that one. Download this one. It's again a GeoTIFF. The file size is about 19 megs. So that should be enough information to make sure you download the correct one. So again, you go click download, go through that same process. I don't really feel like doing that since I already have it on my computer. So I'm just going to go over where you find these other files, and then I'll start bringing it into QGIS to show you guys. The other one is the elevation, or the DEM. So I'm going to go back to return to search. Again, I'm looking for elevation, GeoTIFF, North America. Let's find products again. Where's this one? I can't remember off the top of my head. Let's try, it might be in contours. I don't think it would be, but it might. No. Let's try elevation. Let's just change. Maybe it's in contiguous US. I don't think it is, but it might. Might just have to kind of comb through it. We're looking for one that doesn't have shaded relief. So I'm just going to start over real quick. There it is. So this one is, so if I return to the search, so make sure to do elevation, North America, or I think it was contiguous, GeoTIFF, or it might be TIFF, I don't know. Right, so it is a TIFF, I guess. It doesn't really make a huge difference, but look for the 100 meter resolution color sliced elevation. You could also do the other one. It's just much bigger, of 1.3 gigs. So probably don't want to download that one. So find the one that has color sliced elevation of the continuous US. Again, that one's 82 megs, so it's a little bit bigger, but it's still manageable. And then one more, so our water bodies. So I'm going to go back to data sets again, And now stick within the small scale data sets. I'm going to select now the hydrography one. This is again another one that's going to be North America. So make sure to remember that. So this is hydrography, I guess. I don't know. I've never used that word. North America shapefile, find products. And this one, you're looking for the small scale data set North American Atlas hydrography shapefile. So 10.88 megabytes. So you can see there's even like sea ice and glaciers. That's kind of interesting. So if you ever want to, like, some of these don't have previews for it, but again, if you click on the info or metadata, this will open up a new window and it'll kind of show you where it is or what it looks like. So get those downloaded, and now I'll show you what we can start to do with that to prepare it for the rest of our exercise. So let's go ahead and bring in those other shapefiles. Just like in most other software, you bring this stuff in layers. If you notice, I can no longer see the boundaries for that. That's just because this actual aerial image is on top of it. I can just click, hold, and drag it below. So now you can see where the boundaries are. The next thing I'm going to do is bring in those other vector files. So I'm going to bring in the hydro ones. I'm going to browse. I'm going to find it wherever you download on your computer. And this one, I'm also going to download two types. There's the lines here, and then there's also the fill. So there's one, like the line ones is showing where all the actual drainage lines are for the US and also the rest of North America, as well as where all the water bodies are. So any type of lakes or ponds. So we'll open this one first. You'll see now you've got all your drainage lines for the US. I'll even turn that off so you get a better idea. So you can see where it starts to form Lake Mead right there, but we can just download or install that other vector file to see where those fills are. So this one is the hydro_p, open, and now I've got all my water bodies. So you got the Great Lakes, you've got these Salt Lake, Lake Mead, Lake Powell, all that stuff. What's to do? So mine are already cleaned up. I know for a fact that yours are going to look a little bit different. So let me just actually go through that process of reinstalling it. So I'll show you why that's going to be an issue. So I'm just going to download this one real quick. Let's extract it. Okay, so that's all taken care of. So I'm gonna reopen those ones. So if you ever want to delete them, you just highlight them, right click, and just say remove. Oops, not duplicate. Remove. I guess I can just remove those ones as well. Okay, so let's open up one of those shape files. So again, I'm looking for that shapefile, hit open. Let's turn off our boundaries. So the first thing you'll notice with the boundaries or those drainage lines is that they're obviously also going around the edges of the land masses. Those are definitely not drainage lines. That's just part of this where they've kind of created this closed P line. I'll show you the same thing, even worse case with this hydro P one, is that it comes in a giant like solid mass. So we have to be able to understand how to delete some of that information, which is pretty easy in QGIS. It allows you to edit that information and just delete parts of it. So up here in the top, I have the option to either just select information or find the information about items. So if I select this one, excuse me, where it's got this yellow box with an arrow, you'll see that that's letting me highlight the actual objects in Rhino. The other thing, if I click on this circle with the eye in it for information with the arrow, if I select something, it'll bring up this panel here, and it starts to show me all the metadata. So by clicking that, I just happen to know that this is the indicator to know like what separates these kind of placeholder objects versus actual water bodies is that it has a type value of 15. You can see if I do it for the same thing out here, I think it might have a different value, but yeah, it's got a different type value, but one way to figure that out is if you zoom into an actual water body that you know exists. So this one, I can see that type is 16. This is where it gets a little frustrating with the file or information that you find, is that sometimes it's got really good metadata, sometimes it's terrible and it takes a while to sift through it. Like this, you would think they would give a better classification for what's actually existing versus what's not. It might read better on ArcGIS. This is, again, one of the kind of constraints that QGIS has. So I would rather delete that information in QGIS versus having to export this into Illustrator, because that's just a lot of information that it has to download and process. So sometimes it's better to edit within QGIS itself. So let's go ahead and just deselect some of this real quick. So the other way to find out information about your layers is if you have it highlighted, you can then go up to the same area and click this attributes table. And this allows you to look again at all that metadata for it. I already saw that 16, a type 16 is our actual water bodies. So I can delete everything that isn't a 16. So I'm going to click on type to make sure it's all in numerical order. And I'm going to now go over to this icon of toggle editing mode. This actually allows you to delete information. So we have to click on that first before we can actually remove stuff, else it won't let you. Now you can see all these tools have become highlighted, which are essentially enabling you to do stuff. So again, this is the top of my list. So there's that type 15. It's all in numerical order. So I'm just going to scroll down until that changes to 16. See, there's a lot of information that's just not needed. Oops, so it's right around here. So I can then hold shift, click down on this to highlight all that information that's not important. And then I can just hit the trash can up here to delete it. And I'm going to do the same thing. Everything that comes after 16, I can assume is not needed. So I'm going to do the same thing with that. Now I can click that icon to essentially save it. And now you can see now I am just left with my actual water bodies, not all that other extra stuff. Same thing with the lines. If I want to figure out which lines to delete, I'll just zoom in and I could tell that, for example, this is obviously not a drainage line, right? So I can find that information for it. Oops, let's highlight it. I can see it says type 19, so that tells me something. I can also zoom into what is a drainage line. I can see that that's type 17. And then I can even click on this boundary. I can see that that's type 15. So this one, again, it's a little messy. I know I can delete 15 and 99. What about some of this information? These are also 17s. So it looks like all the drainage lines are classified as 17. Again, I'm making an assumption, but it seems like if I click enough information, I can determine that this 17 type is what is a drainage line, because even this information changes, the names, the country, I can't really easily filter it out that way. So I'm going to do the same thing, where I'm going to go to the attributes table for that layer and delete everything that's not a 17. There's other ways to do this if you're paranoid of deleting data. I like to live life a little dangerously, so. Because once you delete it, you actually delete it like from the shapefile itself. So you have to like re-download it if you screw up. So it's good to make duplicates sometime. That's right. Sometimes I even close my Grasshopper scripts without saving. I know. Okay, so I'm going to save that again. So you can see now I've got only just my drainage scripts and my water bodies. Cool. So you can even see there's Lake Mead. So let's do one more thing, because you can't really edit, well, you can actually edit the rastered files, which is pretty cool. But let's fix some of these. In this case, maybe I want to show all my water features of having the same color value. So we're going to edit some of their characteristics in the layer settings to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and click on my water bodies, I guess. So if you want to change their appearance, you double click on that layer and you'll see a couple options. For this, I'm just going to classify them all as the same type. I'll show you how you can change that later. But I just wanted them all have a fill, but I want to change the color of that fill. So I'm going to click on that plus arrow to bring down all its features. Again, it's just this one color swatch. I'm going to select that now. And now you can see I've got a couple other options. I can change the fill color. I can give it an outline. I can tell what type of fill it is, what type of outline it is. So I'm going to find a blue color that I like. I'm just going to pick something right around there. And what's great about this is that it's kind of like with Illustrator or the other Adobe programs, you can create a swatch and then save it to use for other things. So I'm just going to create this color around here. I'm going to click on this button right here to actually save it. So now I've got this blue tone. I'm going to hit OK. I don't want any outline, so I'm going to change it from outline style from solid line to no pen. And then if you want, you can change the fill style from being solid to a bunch of these different fill styles as well. So I'm just going to keep it solid. I'll hit apply. And now you can see they're all that same blue tone. I'll hit OK. Now I want to do the same thing for those strokes. I'm going to double click on that layer. And what's nice, I can just click there, choose the color, and now I've got that same blue. Hit OK, apply. Now I've got them all matching up. I try to limit my color editing in this because in the end, I'm going to bring it into Illustrator and I have a little more control over it that way. But it is good for some things when you want to be able to separate layers by color to just give them all their own unique color classification. So we got our water bodies. Let's add those other layers. So the shaded relief imagery, I'm going to click now on the rastered icon. So I'm going to import, add raster layer. I'm going to find that one. So this one's just shaded relief, open. And there you go. This one definitely lags quite a bit. But just like the other, that plugin, it has very good resolution as well. So you can see like how awesome that is. I mean, it starts to lose it right around there, but that's zooming in quite a bit. So these are all those kind of basin and ranges within our Great Basin. What's cool is, I mean, I can turn that aerial on and you can start to see it a little bit better of how that actually works, which is pretty neat. Oops. So that's, like I said, that might be valuable for groups that are in the soil to have this. So now you have that. I'm not really going to mess with that. We'll turn it off just so it doesn't lag everything. And then I'm also going to download the elevations one. So I think that's this one. Yep. So I'll hit open. And there you go. So now you've got your elevation 1 and 2, which goes up pretty high. I'll show you how you can, again, change these actual rastered images as well. Like you don't have to use this color palette. It's actually this where it becomes really powerful on how I created those other maps in Rhino, because you can essentially treat any of these DEMs or height field imageries as an actual height field in Rhino on black and white values. So in order to do that, I'm going to double click on that layer again. And you can see it's got its own kind of color classification here. I can change it from being where it says render type. I can change it from being paletted to all these other different settings. So if I do a single band pseudo color, I can then change what gradient I want it to be. So I can choose this color. I can determine how many classifications I want. You can see if I only have 5 classes for this one, you can see it's going to look very kind of, you can really see how it starts to get sliced up, which is kind of interesting. But like I said, you can obviously change those color bands, which are nice. So you can have it look like that, which I think was almost identical to what I chose before. You can make it look like the Joker. If you want to change the number of classifications or make it more smooth, go from changing it from mode to equal intervals, and now you can give it like 30 classifications, and now you'll see all the different gradient values apply. Hit OK if you want to even add more. Let's try 50. So it doesn't look like that did much, but it's good for other cases. So that's pretty cool. Okay, no, I think that's pretty much it, right? So you've got your composition that you've built up. What's cool is you can even, I mean, again, I don't know why you would do it here, because you can always do it in Illustrator or Photoshop. You can even start to give layers an opacity. Oops, hope I didn't delete. So maybe I want that color to read through a little bit. I can just double click on that, go to the transparency setting, and you can see it actually, I think I just have to hit apply. So now you can actually start to have it read through to the shaded relief, which starts to look kind of interesting now. So now you have the formations in addition to the elevations. So fun stuff. Okay, so now you've created this awesome map in QGIS. What do you do with it now? You're probably all wondering. So this next phase, which I think we'll just wrap up as a group, and then I'll work with you guys all individually. I'll show you how you actually export this. Just like how you're dealing with vector files and rastered files, you can export as such as well. You can export it as a JPEG or some type of rastered image, or you can also export as a vector depending on what you have. You obviously can export these rastered images as a vector. It's only for their own specific classification. So let's go ahead and look at this now. So we have our image. So now, like I said, we want to do a couple things. This exercise or this assignment's really looking for you to focus on the western part of the US and to do it at a certain, at least paper size, right? So what size paper are we using?
Yeah.
The giant one. Yeah. So these are going to be gigantic formats, right? So like 3 feet by 6 feet. This part of the assignment should probably only take up half of that. So it's at least 3 feet by 3 feet is a good starting point. This is just a rule of thumb. I think I've covered it. Other instructors have covered it. It's always good, especially when you're exporting from something like this, to give yourself some buffer. So if you ever want to shift your map around, that you don't have to like export it. So for this case, you might want to export it at like 42 inches by 42 inches, just so you can shift it around for different purposes. So let's go ahead and do that. So the way you do that is you have to go up to here and you have to create a print composer. So once you've generated a couple, you can start to manage them, but we just want to create a new print composer. So I'm going to click on this icon. It's the white sheet of paper with this kind of yellow star next to it. I'm going to create a new one. So I'm just going to call this Eco Process 1. Hit OK. Now it brings up your print composer. I'll show you what you need to change on this. The first one is the composition section, so page sizes. We want to change it from whatever that default is to custom. And we also then need to change it to units. I don't know why it's defaulted to millimeters, but we want it to be in inches. And like I said before, we want to give ourselves plenty of room. So you can do something like 42 inches, 48, enough to just allow you that flexibility. So I'm going to do, like I said, 42 by 42. Some of you might find that you need to take up more of that sheet of paper, so plan accordingly. Let's zoom out a little bit. So it's just a very large square. Other things to keep in mind, so you can change your export settings at 3, so you can change its DPI. Sometimes the aerial image for that plugin doesn't like to work at 300 DPI, so you might have to change it to like 200, maybe you get away with it at 250. That all depends, and I'll show you how that works too. The last thing, it doesn't really matter for the rastered images, but for the vector, you might want to change your background, just because it's just like it's going to actually bring in the background color as a shape in Illustrator. So you can change that. You can obviously just change the color itself to be whatever you want. In this case, I want to have it to have no fill. So I'm just saying no brush, and I'm just left with this gray square. Okay, so the next thing is you've got your composition or your paper set up. Now you actually have to bring in that image. So, or whatever you have on your map here. The way to do that is that you scroll over to this side and you'll see to add a new map. So I'm going to click on that. I'm just going to try and click as close I can to the rectangles. If you don't click it down, you can always change the size. So I'll just let go of here for the purposes of this. And you can see I've got some anchor points around this. These snap to that edge. So sometimes it might be good just to not do it to make sure you snap to the actual paper size itself. Oops, okay. So now you've got your paper size, and this is where it gets a little bit funky because it's going to come in at that scale. It's kind of a random scale, and it's also going to position it at a location. You can manually change some of it. In the older versions, you had a little more control over it, but I kind of like the way it is now because it also improves upon other things. If I want to change the position of this, I'm going to use this icon. So move item content. If I have this one selected, I'm only going to move the actual viewport. If I want to move where that content is, I'm going to click inside this one to shift it around. And unfortunately, like it used to work where you could, oh wait, it does. It's just really lagging. You can just use your mouse wheel to zoom in on it. But it makes very large jumps in its zoom, so you don't have a whole lot of control over that. But you can change that if you go from your composition tab here to your item properties, and you can determine the scale. So it's set to like 3 million something. So let's just try 3 million. Nice solid number. I'm just gonna hit tab, right? Did it change? I didn't notice. It did go. So maybe I want to, again, I want to make sure I have enough room for everything. I don't know, that might be good. Because maybe I want to have some type of edge over here so that if you're working on a composition, like compositionally, you can put text and diagrams and not have to worry about it overlapping. This is where you have to kind of start to be a little intuitive and planning for the future of this composition. So if I want, I can shift there. Sometimes you might have to be further in order to show your process a little bit more. But right now, I'll just show you this. So you've got your paper set up for the most part. The good thing to do now is to make sure to save this so that way, whenever you close this, you can just open that up and not have to change all that because you will lose it if you don't. So let's just save this to so in other words, I have the manager itself for the composition manager, which is going to be the size, but then I also need to, which is eco process one, but then I also need to save this project itself so I keep all those other settings. So now it's time to kind of sort through everything. I like to separate each one of those rastered images separately. So I don't need all this other information on, so I don't need my state boundaries. I don't need all those other images. So I'm gonna just deselect them for now. And then I'm gonna go back to my composer, and you'll see that even though I've turned off everything else and turned the aerial, that it still looks the same. So you need to remember to refresh your viewport, and that's just this icon at the top. So click refresh view. This will take a second because that plugin. But now you've got your nice aerial image. So this is cool because then you can start to use some of that part. So let's give it a shot. Let's see if we can actually export this at 300 DPI. So you can change that either in your composition or as you export it. So like I said, you can export these as a JPEG or a PNG or even a vector file or an SVG, which is a scalable vector graphic. That's just the same thing, really. So I'm going to go up to here where it says export as image. So that's where I can export as a JPEG or a rastered image, or I can go and select the next one over that says export as SVG. Again, SVG is just scalable vector graphic. So I'm going to export as an image. It gives you this warning that's going to use a ridiculous amount of memory, so like half a gig. Let's give it a shot. Let's just hit OK. You can see I did one already, but that was at 200. So I'm going to try aerial 300. Hit save. It's going to give you this last option to change that as it warned you. So I'm just going to say not today and hit save. And it's going to take a little bit. So don't freak out when it turns white and nothing's happening. Because like it said, it's taking up a lot of memory to process this. So you can see it's loading. Let's see if it actually worked. Nope. So you can see I just got this gray box. Very sad. You win this time, QGIS. So I'm just going to delete that one again and try it at a lower DPI. Let's see if we can find that magic number. So I'm going to export it again. Blah, blah.
It's too much.
Yeah. It's for, well, what's weird is it's because of, it's this plugin that struggles with it. All the other images will print fine at 300 DPI. It's because of that plugin that it struggles. So probably because it's a very dynamic aerial or imagery, because it changes its resolution as it goes on versus the other ones have a fixed resolution. So I'm gonna hit OK, blah, blah, blah. Let's try it again. Let's try 250. Let's see if we can get away with that. Does everyone understand just like what's going on? Does it seem too complicated or not? Oh, so it likes 250. So this is again like a 42 by 42 inch printout at 250 DPI. That's still going to come out looking great. And you can see if I zoom into it, kind of has to refresh a little bit, but that's pretty good for being that far out. Oh, there's Lake Powell. So if I follow it, there's your Grand Canyon. So I mean, imagine how far we were zoomed out. I mean, That's pretty, I mean, it's pretty blurry, but if you look at like how far that is away, it's really not that bad. So I could probably do a smaller image at a super ridiculous DPI and it'll work well. But you can see like that's pretty good resolution. Like I said, no excuses for having crappy Google imagery now. Is that the right one? Oh, so that's actually this one. Oh, I would use the wrong one, so I was zooming in at the lower resolution anyways. It's still not that much better, but it's pretty good. So let's just, I'll cover a lot of the other stuff. Like I said, this is, to do the vector graphics, again, you just turn on those. In this case, you could probably have multiple vectors turned on. So like your boundaries, your water lines, your water bodies, they all have their own unique properties. Even with the water bodies are fills, the drainage lines are strokes. So even in Illustrator, you can separate them that way. The boundaries are different colors, so you can separate them that way in Illustrator as well. And that's just the same thing. I'll go back to my composer, hit the refresh button. It doesn't look like they're there, but the strokes always come out super thin. And then you just do the same thing where you can export it as a vector, so SVG, save, hit OK. There's not as much issues with that. Now I can go to File, Open. So there's the second one. And as you'll see, here's your nice vector graphic. What's good about it is that it does do a decent job of trimming stuff that goes way beyond. If it's one solid line, it'll keep it, but it does trim it away, so you don't have to worry about there being too much files and lagging your files. So the fun thing too is as you kind of create these different rastered images, you can start to overlay them in Photoshop and start to create your own kind of base aerial. Maybe this is where you want to start to like bring in this kind of stuff. Then obviously, once you do that in Photoshop, you can bring that in Illustrator. Well, that's kind of cool. Do something gnarly looking. So yeah, but the point is everything will match up nicely. You can give a lot of customization to it all. So yeah, let's go ahead and stop that so it's not ridiculously